Ever wondered how Netflix doesn't crash when millions opens the same show at the same time? So this is a very famous problem of system design world called thundering herd problem. So thundering herd problem says when millions of the requests wakes up at the same time, okay, and hit the shared resources simultaneously and overwhelming it, okay. So let's say Netflix ने कोई show drop किया है, बहुत popular show है, right? And let's say 50,000 users went on the platform and opened the show page. Now what would happen in this scenario? Basically, the client would make around 50,000 API calls, right, to get the show metadata. Now this metadata is static in nature, doesn't change very frequently, so this data resides in the cache, right? Now all of these requests can be easily served by a cache, right? But let's say you have a cache expiry. In that case, all requests will start going to the database, right? Because there is a cache miss for all of them. In that scenario, what will happen? Your database will be overloaded and can also lead to thread pool starvation. So Netflix uses multiple approaches to solve this problem. But today we are going to talk about one of the approaches used by Netflix, which is called request coalescing. Okay. So in request coalescing, what happens? Request coalescing says let 50,000 requests comes to the API, but API should make only one call to the database to refresh the cache, right? All 50,000 requests should not go to the database straightforward to refresh the cache. It also means that 1 million requests become one call to the database. Okay. Now how request coalescing works, let's try to understand it. Let's say 50,000 requests arrives at the API. Okay. Now there's a cache miss for the first request. Now first request will check in-flight map whether it is empty or not. If the first request identifies that in-flight map is empty, it becomes the leader and register itself as a fetcher whose responsibility will be to refresh the cache with the latest data. So it will initiate the downstream call and the database's call to get the data and to refresh the cache, right? Now, what would happen with rest of the 49,999 calls? So for those all requests also, it's a cache miss. So what would happen? They will also check the in-flight map data. If those requests finds that in-flight map is not empty, which means that there is a request who has taken the responsibility to refresh the cache. So these all requests will keep waiting until and unless the data arrives into the cache or the cache is refreshed by the first request. Now, once data is arrived in the cache or the cache is refreshed, the response is shared with all of those 49,000 requests, and in the similar fashion, data is returned to the client. This is how Netflix handled thundering herd problem by request coalescing.